"Sir, open this gate immediately. We are authorized HOA enforcement officers." That line hit my ears like a bad punchline at an open mic night. Midnight, 3 silhouettes in blazers, waving clipboards and flashing shiny little badges that looked like they'd come free with a Halloween costume. Their car headlights lit up the gravel dust like smoke on a stage. You ever have a moment where you can't decide if you should laugh, grab your phone, or grab your shotgun? That was me. My dogs were barking like the world was ending. A cold wind cut across the pasture, carrying the smell of hay and damp dirt, and there stood Claudia's chosen officers, trying to look like the Secret Service while one of them kept adjusting his ill-fitting blazer. Another fumbled with his clipboard as if paperwork might substitute for an actual warrant. The thing about HOA drama is it never starts big. It starts small. Letters stuffed in your mailbox about your fence being non-compliant. Notes taped to your door claiming your porch light violates community brightness standards. For weeks, I'd been collecting their junk mail like trophies. Claudia, the pearl-draped president of our HOA, ran the board like a one-woman dictatorship. She treated the subdivision like a gated kingdom, even though my ranch technically sat just outside their jurisdiction. Still, she loved to remind me at every meeting. Community rules extend to all shared access points. Translation: she wanted control of my driveway. So when the headlights washed over my porch that night, I already knew who was behind it. Claudia had finally escalated from petty letters to live-action cosplay. The leader of the trio, a tall guy with a shiny bald head and a badge that literally said Neighborhood Safety Liaison, stepped forward. He barked, "By order of the HOA, we are conducting a property inspection for unauthorized structures. You're required to grant access." I almost spit my coffee. "Buddy," I said, leaning against the porch railing, "the only unauthorized structure I see is that badge hanging off your blazer." Behind him, the other two exchanged uneasy glances. One was a younger woman, her heels sinking into the gravel, who muttered something about just documenting. The third, a stocky man sweating through his dress shirt, was clearly regretting his life choices. "Failure to comply," the bald one snapped, "will result in escalating fines and possible legal consequences." "Oh, is that so?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "And who's signing those fines? Santa Claus? Because last I checked, the HOA doesn't have police powers. You're trespassing." That word landed. Trespassing. I could see the twitch in his jaw. For all their bravado, none of them had an actual leg to stand on. They were banking on intimidation, the same tactic Claudia used in every HOA meeting. Speak loud, look official, and hope nobody knows better. Now you have to understand. The week before this little stunt, Claudia had cornered me after a meeting in the community hall. Pearl necklace glinting under fluorescent lights, she leaned in and hissed, "Your ranch is undermining neighborhood standards. We will bring it into compliance." I'd laughed it off, but she wasn't joking. This midnight stunt was her opening shot. I sipped my coffee slow, letting the silence stretch. "Tell you what," I said, "why don't you hold that pose while I go inside and call the sheriff?" That got their attention. The stocky guy shifted his weight like he was about to bolt. The young woman tried to whisper something about protocols. Baldy doubled down. "The HOA has already coordinated with county officials." "Funny," I said, pulling my phone from my pocket, "because the county official you'll be coordinating with happens to be my cousin, and he doesn't take kindly to wannabe cops harassing folks on private property." The air changed. Gravel crunched under their shoes as they shuffled back a step. The headlights hummed, throwing long shadows across the gate. My dogs kept barking, hackles raised, as if they knew these people didn't belong. "Last warning," Baldy said, his voice cracking just enough to betray him. "Let us in, or what?" He never finished, because right then the sound of real authority rolled down the road. A low growl of tires on gravel, a spotlight sweeping ahead. A sheriff's patrol car, easing into view like a lion stepping into a herd of sheep. The HOA trio froze. Their clipboards drooped, And for the first time all night, Claudia's little theater troupe looked like what they were. Neighbors in bad suits, caught red-handed in a role they weren't qualified to play. I grinned, letting the moment hang heavy. "Well," I said, lifting my mug, "looks like your backup just arrived." And that's where the real story begins. You can't resist an HOA order. That's a finable offense. That was Claudia's voice, shrill as a kettle left on the stove too long, cutting through the night air. Her pearl necklace bounced wildly against her blazer as she waved a clipboard in the sheriff's face like it was the Constitution itself. The patrol car's red and blue lights strobed across her features, turning her righteous fury into something almost theatrical. Neighbors peeked from cracked blinds and half-open doors, their faces glowing in the light show, equal parts horrified and entertained. The so-called enforcement officers stood frozen, their clipboards limp at their sides, suddenly very aware they weren't fooling anyone. And me? I leaned back against my porch railing, coffee in hand, enjoying every second of HOA live theater. The suburban authority strikes back. Here's the thing about Claudia. She didn't stumble into HOA power. She seized it. The first time I met her, she was presiding over a board meeting in the community clubhouse, pearls gleaming under fluorescent lights, voice sharp enough to cut drywall. The agenda that day. Uniform mailbox aesthetics. You'd think she was debating nuclear codes with the way she banged the gavel. She thrived on rules, especially the ones she invented. And the one she loved most was the idea that all residents must comply with community safety directives. I told her point blank in a meeting once, "Claudia, my ranch isn't in your kingdom." And she'd given me the kind of smile that says, "Watch me prove you wrong." So, when my cousin Jake rolled up in his sheriff's cruiser that night, Claudia treated it like a challenge to her crown. "Ma'am," Jake said, stepping out of the car, one hand resting casually near his belt, "this is private property. Care to explain why you and your committee are here at midnight?" Claudia thrust her clipboard forward. "We are conducting a compliance inspection. This resident has repeatedly ignored HOA directives regarding unauthorized outbuildings and—" "Stop!" Jake held up a hand. His voice had that sheriff calm, the kind that could diffuse a bar fight, or in this case, an HOA insurrection. "An inspection at midnight with fake badges?" "They are not fake," Claudia snapped, jabbing a finger toward her makeshift officers. "They are official HOA security volunteers, and they have jurisdiction over community members." The young woman in heels shifted uncomfortably. We're not really—" But Claudia cut her off with a glare so sharp it could skin an apple. I couldn't resist. "Jurisdiction? Claudia, you're not running the Pentagon. This is a ranch. My ranch. And last I checked, you don't get to invent midnight laws." Her jaw clenched. She turned her fury back to Jake. "Sheriff, I expect your cooperation. The HOA has bylaws that grant us enforcement powers." Jake raised an eyebrow, flipping open his notepad. "Bylaws don't trump state law, ma'am. You don't have warrants. You don't have authority here. What you do have is a trespassing problem." That word again. Trespassing. It rippled through the little crowd gathering behind curtains and porch railings. I saw a couple neighbors hiding smiles, the kind of quiet satisfaction that comes from finally seeing the bully get called out. Claudia wasn't backing down. Her pearls caught the flashing lights as she puffed up like a cat cornered in a kitchen. "If you refuse to assist us, Sheriff, then you are obstructing community governance. This man," she stabbed her clipboard toward me, "is a danger to neighborhood standards." Jake's lips twitched like he was fighting back a laugh. "Danger to neighborhood standards? That's not exactly a chargeable offense, ma'am." Her so-called enforcers shuffled their feet. The stocky guy whispered, "Claudia, maybe we should just—" "Silence," she barked. "We are within our rights." That's when Jake stepped closer, lowering his voice but making sure everyone could hear. "Ma'am, if you keep this up, you're looking at harassment and impersonation charges. Do you really want your HOA on the front page for playing cop?" For the first time, Claudia faltered. Her lips tightened. Her eyes darted to the neighbors peeking out like an audience at a free midnight show. Pride was the only thing holding her upright. She adjusted her pearls, straightened her blazer, and tried to rally. "This isn't over," she hissed. "We will pursue legal remedies. The HOA will not be undermined." Jake stepped back, letting the silence hang. The only sounds were the crickets in the field and the low growl of his cruiser's engine. Then he said, "I suggest you and your volunteers head home before I start writing citations." Claudia's face flushed crimson, the kind of shade that doesn't fade quickly. Her eyes swept over the neighbors, then locked on me. She pointed the clipboard like a dagger. "You think you've won, but you'll see. The HOA always wins." With that, she spun on her heel, nearly tripping in the gravel, and stormed back toward her sedan. Her volunteers scrambled after her, shedding any pretense of authority. One of them actually tossed his badge into the dirt as he fled, the metal catching the patrol car's headlights before landing face down in the dust. The neighborhood watched in silence, holding its collective breath. The queen bee had been swatted, but she wasn't done buzzing. I took one last sip of coffee, turning to Jake with a grin. "Think she'll calm down?" Jake shook his head, eyes still on Claudia's retreating taillights. "Nope, she's not finished. This is just round one." And he was right. By the time the patrol car lights faded, I could already picture Claudia plotting her next move, pearls rattling like sabers in the dark. On the charges of trespassing, impersonating officers, and harassment, this court finds the defendants guilty. The gavel cracked down like thunder, and for a second the whole courtroom held its breath. Claudia froze mid-clutch of her pearls, the color draining from her face as whispers rippled through the gallery. Her lawyers shifted uncomfortably in their tailored suits, riffling papers they knew wouldn't save her now. Neighbors leaned forward, hungry for every word, as the weight of months of HOA nonsense finally came crashing down. And me? I sat back with the faintest grin, watching the empire of clipboards and bylaws topple right there on the county courthouse stage. Let me tell you, this showdown had been building like a summer storm. After the patrol car incident, Claudia didn't retreat. She doubled down. Overnight, glossy flyers appeared in mailboxes with bold warnings. Community standards enforcement is non-negotiable. The next HOA meeting was a circus, Claudia pounding her gavel so hard it rattled the folding tables. She accused me of defaming the board, and insisted my resistance endangered the moral fabric of the subdivision. I pointed out that the HOA had sent fake cops to my ranch at midnight, and half the room broke into nervous laughter. Claudia didn't. She vowed, legal action will be taken. And she delivered. Within weeks, subpoenas arrived. Her hand-picked lawyers filed motions, trying to spin their midnight raid as a neighborhood safety inspection, gone misunderstood. But here's the thing, when your safety inspection includes plastic badges and trespassing on private property, the law doesn't laugh with you. It laughs at you. The day of the trial, the courthouse lobby buzzed like a hive. Neighbors showed up in Sunday clothes, clutching folded papers and muttering stories about late-night harassment and overzealous rule enforcement. Even the bailiff cracked a smirk when he called the case the Homeowners Association Board versus reality. The cold open moment hit early. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman with a voice like a scalpel, laid it out clean. "Your Honor, this is not about safety. It is about abuse of power. It is about neighbors who decided they were the law." Then came the evidence. Dashcam footage from Jake's patrol car, capturing Claudia shrieking about jurisdiction. Cell phone videos from residents peeking through blinds. Testimony from the so-called security volunteers, who admitted Claudia pressured them into playing dress-up cops. Claudia's lawyers tried spinning. They waved their hands about community bylaws and collective safety. They argued that the HOA had a duty to enforce compliance, even proactively. The judge leaned back in his chair, unimpressed. "Counselor, bylaws don't authorize impersonating law enforcement," he said dryly. That's not proactive, that's criminal. The gallery chuckled, and Claudia's lips tightened until they were just a thin line under her pearls. Then it was Jake's turn. My cousin walked to the stand in uniform, steady as a stone pillar. He described arriving to find neighbors flashing fake badges, demanding entry at midnight. His voice carried the calm weight of authority, the kind that didn't need theatrics. They had no legal right to be there, he said simply. They were trespassing. No flair, no grandstanding, just fact. That single word sealed it. I'll admit, part of me expected Claudia to finally break, maybe admit fault, maybe show an ounce of humility. But she didn't. When her turn to testify came, she stood tall, pearls catching the fluorescent courtroom lights, and launched into a speech about upholding neighborhood standards and protecting property values. Her voice trembled, but not with fear. Pride. Pride and denial, a dangerous cocktail. She accused me of being hostile to community governance, as though that excused impersonating an officer. The judge cut her off. Mrs. Whitfield, this is not a homeowners' meeting. This is a court of law. Silence fell. You could hear the hum of the air conditioner, smell the faint tang of coffee from the hallway vending machine. Claudia's empire wasn't just crumbling, it was dissolving under fluorescent light. When the verdict landed, the tension broke like glass. Fines, restraining orders, and a stern reminder that HOAs are not police departments. Claudia sat rigid, pearls trembling against her collarbone. Her lawyers packed their briefcases with the enthusiasm of men heading for a funeral. Neighbors whispered, some openly smiling now, relief washing through the room like fresh air after a storm. But here's the thing. People like Claudia don't vanish with one gavel strike. As the bailiff called the next case and the crowd began to shuffle out, Claudia's eyes found mine. Cold, sharp, unbroken. She didn't say a word, but her glare spoke volumes. I could read it clear as day. This isn't over. And in that moment, I realized something. The courtroom had ended one battle, sure, but the HOA war? That was just evolving. Because people like Claudia don't lose gracefully. They regroup, they plot, they wait for the next move. I walked out of that courthouse into the bright afternoon sun, the smell of asphalt warming under my boots. Neighbors patted me on the shoulder, some laughing, some whispering thanks. But in the back of my mind, I could already feel the storm clouds forming again. And sure enough, by the time I pulled back into my driveway, there it was, a fresh envelope in my mailbox. HOA letterhead, bold print. Inside, a single line. The board will reconvene to address unresolved compliance matters. The pearls weren't done rattling yet.